Hey everybody, this is Matthew Poes with Poes Acoustics, and in this video I am reviewing the Lyngdorf MXA 8400, which is a Purifi-based amplifier that was sent to me for review and use quite a number of years ago, actually, when it first came out. And I am way overdue on getting this review done. Bruno, who I hopefully will be getting to see this summer, I'm going to go out to visit. I'm going to be out in Paris, and I'm going to go out to visit him. He and I had been chatting, and I've just been a fan of his amplifiers for quite a long time, going back to the Hypex days. And when the Purifies came out, he sent me one of their module, the test evaluation kits. And I bought the stuff needed to turn that into a 2-channel amp, and I tested it. And it was so cool because it was the first amplifier I had ever measured that I couldn't measure. It was the first one where my Quantum Asylum analyzer, even with the notch filter and the oscillator and everything, which is like gives you really good measurement capabilities, it wasn't able to measure it at its full capabilities. And so I was like happy and sad. It's like, it's so good. That's so cool that it can measure so well. And at the same time, it's sad that I can't actually measure it that well. So I've gone ahead and put together a little PowerPoint of the findings I had. But like, one thing to keep in mind is that I get gear all the time. I get a lot of gear. And sometimes I buy gear to evaluate myself because I can't get it for free. And other times I can get it lent to me on like a long-term loan and can hold on to it. And I have stuff like sitting in the garage. There's stuff sitting on the floor of my theater. Like, I have a lot of gear. If something is in my system and it stays in my system, it probably means that I think that it's the best of the stuff I have access to, and it wouldn't stay there if it wasn't good. Nope, that doesn't. Let's do this way. All right. So this is the MXA, sorry, 8400 amplifier. And there's a picture of it. And I'll actually throw in some B-roll later that you can see of what the amplifier looks like in my rack. It's like sitting in my rack. It's kind of boring. So I didn't think pictures of my own system were that great. All right. So the amplifier is rated at 8 times 400 watts at 4 ohms, 8 times 200 watts at 8 ohms. And that's 2-channel mode. Although I actually was able to get that. I was able to hit a very close number to that. I think it was around 180 watts when I was powering all the channels. So it does well. And then you can actually do 800 watts per channel if you bridge the amplifier, although the noise and distortion gets a little bit worse. The power that they give you based on rated distortion is 8 times 340 watts at 4 ohms, and then 8 times 200 watts at 8 ohms. So they're saying at the rated distortion, which is a little bit lower. And I'm actually looking here and I don't see where it says, but I've measured it at, oh, I see. Yeah. THD is 0.001% at 200 watts, 8 ohms, 340 watts, 4 ohms. They also show that it can go down to as low as 0.0006% at 10 watts, 4 ohms. You'll see my measurements in a little bit. I mean, so I actually did take measurements. I don't think I captured its full capabilities, but I took measurements on it. It's got 25 amps of output current and 58 volts peak to peak. 116 bridge. That's all very typical. Now here's where things get, well, for an amplifier of this power, I should say, a little more current would be nice, but the higher end Purifi modules have that. This is what you expect at this price point within Purifi's modules. So there's a high, medium, and low for the gain. And if you do high, you get 26.1 dB of sensitivity. And then, no, I'm sorry. What is it? High and low? Yeah, high and low. I'm mixing this up now. So the high is 26.1 and then the low is 16.6. So what's really nice about that is that matches really well with what the Storm and the Trinnov processors, but actually not just Storm and Trinnov, Marantz, Anthem, all of those processors have higher voltage outputs. They actually will do 5-6 volts of output before they start to clip, and sometimes even more. What that means is that you can get a lower noise floor in your room with less hiss, even with these high-end processors, by simply going to the lower gain setting, because there's enough voltage output in the preamp to drive these things to clipping. So I would recommend using that lower gain setting, and that's how I'm using it in my system, and was a key thing for me. They rate the signal to noise ratio of this amplifier at 128 dB A-weighted. I wasn't able to equal that number. I think I got 122 dB A-weighted, which was about as good as I could do. Now, mind you, I'm pretty sure that's like the limit of what my system can measure. And I also didn't measure signal to noise ratio exactly the way they did. I used a little bit different technique. It's what's used by Texas Instruments and their amplifiers, and it's what's built into the Quantum Asylum to give you a reading. And it tends to give a lower number by at least 5 or 6 dB. Damping factor was greater than 1200. They give you the input sensitivity. So low sensitivity mode is 6 volts. And like I said, most of the processors we use have around 6 volts before they clip. And then it's got 8 XLR analog inputs. So it's only a balanced, it's a fully balanced differential design. So it's got only balanced inputs, and then it's got Nutrix Speak-On outputs. I originally was like, awesome, Speak-On. I love Speak-On. And I do in pro settings, and I do when it's all pre-done. I will say in my own system, when I had to sit there and fiddle with getting the connectors on the end, I did not love Speak-On so much. So I already mentioned this. It's got XLR inputs only, Speak-On outputs, and it comes with the plugs you need to do that. It also shows you how to set it up for bridging purposes. It's all like, I think it's all very well made, and the quality is very good. I understand why they did Speak-On. You can see it's a much cleaner packaging on the back. It's just, you got to make sure you do those connections right. And it's kind of a pain, especially if you've got really heavy, like I have 12 gauge wire all around. So the Power Perfect power supply was actually why I got this in the first place. So way back when I first talked to Bruno about this amplifier, and he sent me that module to test, he told me to go and buy the Hypex power supply. And he said the reason to do that was that it was the best power supply option that existed off the shelf at the time. But he also said that it was not the best power supply, and that he had ideas for better power supply designs that he wanted to do. Now, I think that they're still working on that. But I want to point out that Peter Lyngdorf is a partner in Purifi. So it would not shock me if there was some information sharing between Peter's engineers and Bruno on how to optimize the power supply. But basically, this is not some off-the-shelf power supply they bought. This is their own design. It's a ground-up power supply design. And they put a lot of effort into optimizing this for use in an 8-channel amplifier like this to minimize noise, maximize performance, and get the most out of it. And so I got very good, like my measurements suggested that it is actually very good. And I did actually find that it had less power supply noise yet than what I was able to achieve with the kit amplifier, if you will, the engineering sample that I had tested previously. So I think they did a very good job. Part of me hopes, Bruno didn't confirm this, understandably, I don't think he's allowed to, but I was kind of hoping that this may have had whatever magic sauce he was working on. He never fully explained that to me, and maybe I can ask him this summer when I see him. But apparently there's more that's possible. He was telling me that I've worked with these kinds of power supplies before, and some of the designs I've worked with are highly regulated, which is kind of nice. But one of the problems with highly regulated supplies is that when the power goes up, the voltage doesn't sag. But the problem is if there isn't the current there to handle that, then eventually the thing just falls apart and you get into this like hard clipping situation with the power supply. And it can even go on and off and on and off. And that's what I found to be a big issue with them. So you end up needing to have not like a little bit, like with a linear supply, if you've got around what you need, you're okay, even if you get into like clipping territory on the amplifier, and you can still kind of soft clip. With a Class D amplifier connected to a switching power supply, if you don't have realistically 2, 3, 4 times the output of the amplifier in the switching supply, you run into this problem. But it's not actually apparently an inherent problem with switching supplies. It was because these were highly regulated. So Bruno was saying when he designed the Hypex power supplies, he intentionally designed them to be more like a linear supply in their behavior. As a result, they're not as well regulated, and there's some other little issues, but overall, they're good power supplies. They just happen to behave more like linear supplies. This one, I think what he was trying to achieve was something that was a little bit of a hybrid of the two. Doesn't have the negatives of a highly regulated supply, but does have some of its positives, and I'm hoping this one does. There was no easy way for me to tell that from testing. So it's got the Egentact, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, amplifier technology. So it's an error correction technology. It's what allowed him to get much lower noise and distortion. It appears to be one of the 1ET400A amplifiers. That may not be true. I know that they've replaced that with a newer module now, but power-wise, it's very similar. You can see that this is rated at 425 watts RMS at 4 ohms and 227 watts at 8 ohms. The power specs for this actually match fairly closely if you go to 0.5%, which is where I'm guessing those numbers come. The module's distortion is 0.00017% at 100 watts, 4 ohms, and it's rated at 131 dB of dynamic range. So I mentioned before, I only was able to achieve 122 dB of signal to noise ratio, and that's the module rating. So they actually rate the amplifier at 128 dB anyway. The output noise of the module itself is 11.5 UVA with no additional gain. This amplifier has some additional gain on top of that, so it's going to be higher than that. And then 94% efficiency, which is also what the overall amp was rated for. So this shows my measurements, and you can see that the THD was around 121, minus 121 dB. The THD plus noise was not quite that good. And this is at 5 watts. And I actually took, when I saw that, I'm like, oh, that's weird. I wonder if I mismeasured something. So I went back and retook some measurements. This is also at 5 watts. And it was minus 110 dB THD. It wasn't as good, but actually the THD plus noise was minus 106, a much better spec. And this is A-weighted, which is why it has that weird shape to it. It just happens to show that when you do that. So I think that that's a good number, fairly consistent with its performance. As I said, I can't really get fully at its measurement capabilities. So while I couldn't confirm the 130 dB of dynamic range, my measurement equipment also doesn't have that range at that kind of power level. I measured 122 dB signal to noise at 100 watts, which is near the limit of my gear. Other measurements from other people on Purifi modules have confirmed that it does around its capabilities, and I expect this to be no worse because its low power measurements were all consistent. All the measurements I took of the raw module versus their amp were also consistent. And so I actually pulled those up, and this shows the two of them. And even I can't read this, I'm sorry, but they're both like roughly 1 watt measurements, and it shows them to be very, very similar in THD plus noise and THD and signal to noise ratio, all of it suggesting fairly consistent performance between the regular module and this. The one thing I'll notice is that so the weird shape you see on the left one there, they're both using my notch filter, but the newer version of the Quantum Asylum that I have, I think it's 403, Q403, it appears that it's not showing the bend anymore. It shows it the way it should. In the old days, it actually used to show the filter that it was using for the notch. So you can see, though, that there's a significantly larger amount of power supply noise in my amplifier that was based on the engineering sample with the Hypex power supply and this new finished amp. So I think that they did do a better job with the power supply. This is the frequency response of the amplifier, and something to keep in mind with this. So this is showing only 8 ohms. I actually did do one of 8 and 4 ohms, but they lie on top of each other and you can't see it. There's like no real difference. The other thing is that I actually think this is showing the bandwidth of my filter that I use for measuring Class D amplifiers and not the true response of the amplifier. I probably need to put together a jig so I can do measurements like this. I'm using the one that comes directly from Quantum Asylum, and it's supposed to be good out to like 50 kilohertz, but it actually does have some roll off at 30 kilohertz. I think this is actually not that far off from Bruno's measurements of it, but it's different enough that I suspect what I'm actually measuring is my own filter's response. In either case, it's excellent, right? Like that's really good. There are no issues with bandwidth on this amplifier. So one of the things, so give you kind of my experience with its use. When I first got the Trinnov, so kind of going back in history here, the first processor I had in this theater that's behind me in my house, in this new house that we built now, not so new, 5 years ago, was a Marantz processor. And it was from the older generation of processors. And it was hooked up to the Perlisten speakers using amplifiers that I had laying around. And I'm trying to remember what they were. I know some of them were, not trying to remember now, Outlaw Audio. I think it was mostly Outlaw Audio amps. And then I had Bruno's amplifier, which I had built, I believe, before I moved here, fairly positive. And so I had that for my left-right. Now that amplifier is extremely low noise. Even the other amplifier had a signal to noise ratio. I think it's like 115 dB or something like that. Like it's a pretty good signal to noise ratio. So by all rights, it should have been very little hiss. And these speakers are sensitive, but they're not that sensitive, especially the side surrounds, which are in the upper 80s, I think 87, 88, maybe it's 89. I can't remember exactly what it is, but somewhere in that range. So what I noticed was, okay, so keep in mind, because I think people get a little goofier on this, where I'll say like, I heard hiss, and they're like, well, I don't have any hiss. That's crazy. Such expensive equipment hisses. You probably do have hiss. You have to remember the audibility of the hiss is going to depend on the noise floor of the room. Normal rooms are so noisy that the hiss that comes out of speakers is not all that noticeable. In that room, the noise floor is extremely low. The NCB rating of that room is 10. So we've confirmed that at this point. I actually think it was 9 officially. So NCB 9 means you're going to hear faint noises more readily, right? So I was sitting in there, and trust me, it's not bothersome. It's not like you watch a movie and you can hear it. It's more one of those, you're sitting in a quiet room and you do hear the hiss, or you're watching a movie like one of the movies that actually makes use of silence, something like that, or like certain sound, like there's certain music that has silent parts, and like you could hear faintly in the background hiss. The other thing was that the walking path in my room forces you to walk by one of the side surrounds. And I always felt like it was kind of annoying that I had all this expensive gear, and every time I walked by the side surround, you could hear hiss. So I blamed it on the Marantz, because when you unhooked the Marantz, or you turned it off, or you shorted the input of the amplifiers, a lot of that hiss went away. It was still there a little bit, but a lot of it went away. So I thought, okay, it's the Marantz's fault. And it was sort of. Trinnov comes along, and I get my altitude 16, and the hiss goes down, but it doesn't go away. I can still hear it. And I thought, this is nuts. This thing is like as good as it gets. There's not a better processor on the market. Even the best measuring ones are not that much better. And mine was of the newest. It just come out, and it had the new Sabre DAX in it. So this was like the newest of them with even lower noise. And I thought, this is absolutely crazy that this thing has hiss. So I went down a rabbit hole of a journey, if you will, to reduce hiss. And it started with a call to the engineering team over at Trinnov, or it might have even been to John, who had said, try putting a 5 to 10 dB attenuator on your amplifiers. It probably will help. You have too much gain. And I thought, well, I don't think that's going to do anything, but okay. So sure enough, I put in, I think it was a 10 dB attenuator on every channel of all my amplifiers, and the noise floor dropped dramatically to the point that I could barely hear it. And when I say barely hear it, I mean at the seated position, I could no longer hear it at all. And when I got up near the speakers, I could very faintly hear it if I put my ear right next to it. Okay, so we know what the problem is, but that's not my favorite solution. So it turned out that the Purifi amplifier I had the ability to switch to a lower gain setting, which is ultimately what I did. And so I switched it to the lower gain setting, and sure enough, got the lowest noise that I'd ever gotten. I actually was able to get it even lower, because the next thing I did was I actually needed more channels. So I went ahead and bought some topping D90, I think mine's the limited edition D90 DACs, which have extremely good performance. And the Trinnov doesn't muck it up at all, which has been surprising, or at least not enough to matter. And so that now is what feeds my Purifi amplifiers and the LCRs, at least. There's 2 D90s there. And that made it to a point where even if your ear is right up against the speaker, you cannot hear a thing at all. It is like completely dead silent at this point. And basically it was the combination of like lowering the noise floor of the preamplifier even more, because it already was actually very good, but it could get better, and lowering the gain on the amplifier. So why did the low gain matter? Because the lower gain means you're not boosting whatever residual noise is coming out of the preamplifier so much. So most amplifiers have 20 to 30 dB of gain, and that's a lot of boosting of residual hiss. And if you can reduce it to 15 to 17 dB of gain, that's really a lot better. And so the Trinnov is really optimized for about 16, 17 dB of gain on a typical amplifier like this. So that's what I'm kind of running here. When I put it on the low gain setting, I say almost no hiss. I mean, at this point, there is no hiss. I don't hear it. I'm sure it's technically there, but with my noise floor, whether you're in the seated position or right up against the speakers, you cannot hear hiss anymore. It's a very clean sounding amplifier. So you hear people talk about how Class D sounds like digital, which of course D does not stand for digital. It's a switching amp. And it doesn't, like, there's no artifacts, there's no harshness, there's no edginess. It just sounds like a clean, pure amplifier. If anything, it's characterless. It doesn't have a character to it. And so compared to like fun amplifiers, like single-ended triodes, it's not a fun amplifier, but it's a very pure amplifier. Now, one thing I've noticed with Class D amps, which I think is actually one of the reasons why some people don't like them, is that their at-limit behavior can be awful. And so all amplifiers clip eventually. That's very common. You would have to have a ridiculous amount of power to just never clip. And so what can happen is when you're watching scenes that do cause clipping, you can end up in a position where the amplifier is not really is, it's not behaving like it should, and it creates a lot of edginess and harshness and doesn't sound good. And the one thing I notice about everything Bruno does is he seems to account for that in the designs. So this amplifier, very consistent with past Lyngdorf efforts, but better. I mean, this really is, in my opinion, a lot better than Lyngdorf's old amplifiers. And Bruno's efforts is that its at-limit behavior is great. And so even when you push it, you don't really hear any issues. There's no coloration, as I said, there's no character. It's a very well-made amplifier. It's simple. It's not like a particularly fancy design, but it does have a feel of luxury to it, and I appreciate that. The speak-ons are a bit of a pain. That would be like my one negative, but I get why they did it, and I actually like speak-ons, even if I think they're a pain. I just didn't like installing them. But overall, I love this amplifier, and I don't plan to pull it out. The only reason why I would switch anything at all, and if anything, it might just be about adding another one of these and bridging the channels, would be that having a 3-channel amplifier based on something like the 9040 module would be nice. My S7Is can handle the power. And this amplifier is not really powerful enough to push the S7Is to their limits. Now, in normal use, I don't believe I've ever hit the limits of this amplifier. But when I was doing some max SPL testing, we did actually notice that it failed the test due to the amp clipping, not the speaker. And so it was sort of a realization that actually there's some more SPL, if you will, some more headroom that I'm leaving on the table. So part of me, even though I don't really think I need it because those speakers are more than the room needs, part of me wants to go to something even more powerful. But in any rational use, and anybody who's ever demoed my system would agree with this, you'll never hear this amp clipping. I've never had a problem with it. It just, you should see, when I say the amplifier was clipping when it failed a test, we were like in the over 120 dB at the listening position range, like way beyond normal. Like I had hearing protection on and I was in another room when I did the test. So the amplifier retails for $8,995 with everything going on, including tariffs in Europe. That price may be changing, but that's the price that I have, at least as of right now when I'm doing this video. I think it's a really good design. It's a great power supply. It was really well executed. And at this point in time, there's so many Purifi and Hypex type amplifiers out there that it's easy to say, well, just get the cheapest one. But there is some value in making sure it's a well executed amplifier with a good warranty from the company that's putting it together. And I think most importantly, that the layout and the power supply are done really well. In this case, we know both were done extremely well. And so there's nothing being left on the table performance-wise due to that. I really like that it has adjustable gain, that it's got the low and high setting. I think that that is an important feature that I wish all amplifiers had, especially now that I better understand the value of it. The speak-ons are a really good idea, but like I said, I had a hard time putting them on. I think it's a mixture of 12 gauge wire that's been reconnected to things like gazillion times, and me being lazy, but it was sort of a pain point for us when we were I had some help putting the amp in. I would love to see them put together an even more powerful version of this amplifier, maybe a 3-channel or a 4-channel version. The 8-channel amp is great and does probably meet the needs for most people. But as I said, because I personally have a need for a more powerful amplifier, I shouldn't say need, desire, want, none of this is a need, right? So because I would like to have a more powerful amplifier, it would be nice if they offered like a 3-channel version that uses the higher power module, maybe with the same kind of power supply, but more optimized for that high power module, taking advantage of what they know how to do and do well. I think that this amplifier is so uniquely different, and in my opinion, better than anything else that Lyngdorf is offering from their amplifiers, that it would make sense for them to build this line out further. I'm sure some of you are going to point out that there's cheaper versions of Purifi amps out there, and that may be true. Finding an 8-channel all-in-one version in a chassis this size that's executed properly, I think is actually kind of hard to find, especially from a company that's got good results. There's a couple companies out there, I'm not going to name names because I don't think it's fair. There's a couple companies I've worked with that my experience so far has been okay, and a couple that I've actually had bad experiences with. So there's a few that I've bought amplifiers from them, put them into systems, and actually had to send them back because of issues, or they failed to meet spec because they did something goofy with the wiring, or the quality of construction was clearly not very good. And maybe that doesn't hurt performance, but people pay good money. They expect to see things that look like cleanly drilled holes, things like that. So I think it kind of depends. I mean, there was a European company, I think they're French, that was making some Purifi amps, and we had used them in a project, and they were quite expensive. They were made to order. They took quite a long time to get over here. I think to get the 8-channel version would only be a little bit cheaper than this, and we ended up having to send them back and could not get a satisfactory resolution. So ultimately there was money given back, and we moved on to something else. I mean, with companies like Lyngdorf, that's just not an issue. You know, these are not made to order. They're properly put together and well executed, and there's just no issues with them. So, I mean, I get that there's cheaper options, but to me, this is a great amplifier for the industry I work in, and for people like myself putting together good theaters. It's become a piece of a larger systems approach that I use to produce very high dynamic range systems. So you take something like a really good processor that has digital outs for all the channels, the Trinnovs, the Storms, things like that. Really, I'm at Steinway Lyngdorf, I guess, too, but I primarily work with the Storm and Trinnov processors. And the Trinnov actually has 4 channels of digital out, both of the altitude 16 and 32 as standard. And then you can upgrade the 32 to have more digital outs. But assuming you're using even just the 4, you then put in a really good DAC. And I have found that some work better than others. The toppings so far have been pretty flawless, and I've been using the D90 series for most of my projects. I actually have a box full of them at this point in time. So I've got I think I've got 2 or 3 D93s. I've got I think it's a D70 Octo or something like that. I've got the D90s I have. So you take those DACs, you connect them to the processor, you then plug that DAC output directly into a very low noise amplifier like this Lyngdorf in the low gain setting, and the end result is a system that, as far as I'm concerned, is audiophile performance. Like, I don't really know what the term audiophile means anymore. I feel like it's become such a corrupted term, but to me, growing up, that term referred to high-end, like, audio performance without significant problems. Like, there's no distortions, there's no colorations, nothing is being, I mean, I don't know how to say this right. Like, people constantly talk about home theater as if it's a compromise to 2-channel listening, and that good audiophile systems perform way better than good home theater systems. Well, I think that it's actually, that used to be true. I think that it is possible today to put together a home theater system that is not really compromising the 2-channel performance, and in fact allows you to do it across more than 2 channels without issue. I mean, the speakers that we tend to use now in top home theaters are top speakers, period, and would be great in a 2-channel system or a home theater. Mine are the Perlisten S7Is, the S7Is, or the S7Ts for that matter. The tower version are commonly used in audiophile systems, the S7Ts especially. The LEs and the new black editions are a very popular speaker for very high-end 2-channel systems. The Purifi amplifiers is like as good as it gets, kind of a thing. I mean, yes, there's technically lower noise and distortion amps, but not enough to really be a big deal. We're already talking about completely inaudible levels of distortion and noise. And the DACs are kind of the next thing. So yeah, the Trinnovs and all the basically home theater processors are not implementing the DACs into digital to analog circuits that are as good as it gets. They're good, but they're more like what I would call a step below state-of-the-art performance right now. But there are products like these topping DACs, or I've actually done these with DCS, WADACs, lots of like really, really high-end DACs, and it doesn't really matter. Like, they all work fine. And so you can get performance that's really up there. In my opinion, these, like the benchmark DACs and the topping DACs, are affordable while offering state-of-the-art performance. So those are the kind of DACs I like to use. I've been using the topping mostly because they also have AES EBU inputs. Benchmark don't, but other than that, they're basically equivalent in performance. And you can put together, like I said, a home theater system where at least your front 3 channels are equivalent to the best 2-channel audiophile systems, meaning they're like audiophile surround systems. And so, as I said, this Lyngdorf amplifier, it's a piece of that puzzle. It's a piece of that systems approach that I've been applying, and I think works really well. I'm really happy with it. I love the amplifier. I definitely recommend it. And if you're looking for something to pair with your Storm or Trinnov, while they both make good amplifiers, I do think that the Lyngdorf MXA 8400 is a better amplifier and offers a sizable step up in performance. I hope you enjoyed the review. Please like my videos. Please subscribe to the channel. I'd like to get some more subscribers, and keep coming back. I got more stuff coming. Thanks, everybody.